In this video, I will cover another new Homeland expansion faction, the Knaves of the Deepwood. I will be using the most recent print and play as of July 7th, which is likely to be the final one. So this faction has two main goals: take hostages and place acclaim. They have 13 warriors, including 3 captain warriors and 8 acclaim tokens. During your turn, you will be playing as one of your 3 captains that will be decided during your setup. In advanced setup, you draw 4 captains and pick 3. Since the Knaves use vagabond pawns, and they cannot take hostages from the vagabond cannot be in the same game as the Knaves. Your captain warriors can move in and out of forests, ignoring rule, taking skunk warriors with them. When you are taking actions on your turn, these actions have to be using your active captain. Once you have finished using your active captain, you will flip it over, and that captain cannot be used again until you are able to take it easy during evening, which will happen every 3 turns once all of your captains have been used. If your captain was removed, you will place it in a forest during birdsong and take 1 less action. They cannot be replaced or placed outside of this. An example of replacing would be the Lizard Cult's convert action. Unlike the vagabond, the captains are not considered pawns, but warriors instead. Each captain will add 2 items to your stash. When using a captain, you can use any items from your stash to replace an action. When you obtain items from crafting or filching them off of your opponents, you will place them in the stash. When you use an item for its action, you will exhaust it, flipping it face down. You will flip it back up when you take it easy every 3 turns. Now let's talk about prisoners and acclaim, as this is how you will be scoring most of your points. Anytime your captain battles, you take one of the faction warriors you dealt a hit to as prisoner, moving it to an adjacent forest without any prisoners. If there are no available forests with 0 prisoners, you cannot take the warrior hostage. There are 2 ways for a faction to get its warriors back. The first is if you have to place a captain into a forest during birdsong, prisoners are removed from that forest you place your captain in, as well as all adjacent forests to your captain, returning prisoners to their supplies. The second is during Take It Easy. Every 3 turns, the faction with the most prisoners chooses a clearing and places prisoners into that clearing from all adjacent forests. In the first scenario, the prisoners return to the faction's supply, while in the second scenario, prisoners will be placed into a clearing. If there's a tie for most prisoners, you get to choose who gets to place their prisoners. During evening, you score 1 point for every 2 prisoners. Similarly to how in every battle you get a prisoner, after every battle you also get to place an acclaim, so long as your captain that is battling can survive the battle. Something that is interesting to note is that taking prisoners and placing acclaim is a faction ability that happens when a captain attacks, so even if you are taking battle actions with card effects, you can still take warriors and place acclaim. For example, the Keepers in Iron cannot delve after they take an Eerie Emigre battle because delving is unique to the retinue. Acclaim has 4 uses. The first, most obvious one is that you score 1 point during evening for every 2 acclaim. The next is you can recruit warriors by spinning cards matching their clearing up to your acclaim. The third is they can act as a crafting piece when you're serving. The crafting with the Knaves is a little complicated, so I will go over that into more depth later. The fourth is acclaim can enhance revel and gift actions. When an opponent removes an acclaim, they will have to place a skunk from your supply to an adjacent forest. This may seem like a good thing at first, since you're placing a skunk from your supply to the board. However, since you have such a limited number of warriors, you may wish you had it in your supply so you can control how you recruit with it instead. When it's in a forest, it can be difficult to utilize it since skunk warriors can only be moved along with a captain, costing you precious actions to collect your scattered deserters. A skunk in a forest can be useful, however, in the event that you lose a captain. When you place a captain in a forest, you can choose the one that has a skunk, giving skunks something useful to do again. Finally, let's talk about actions. Captains will have a special ability, which you can only use if it is the ability of your acting captain. You cannot use the cheat action while the gladiator is your acting captain, for example. You take 4 actions on a turn, or 3 if you had to place your captain into a forest during birdsong. This is a pretty harsh setback, since one of those 3 actions is likely to be a move to move out of the forest you start in, and then you also probably don't have enough skunks with you to safely battle, so try to avoid losing captains at all costs. There are some items, however, that are very useful when recovering from losing your captain. First, let's go over filch. The first thing to note is you can only filch once per turn. Filching has two parts to it. First, you choose if you are taking an item from an enemy and you're clearing, or if you are crafting an item. If you're crafting, you use your captain as a crafting piece, and score no victory points from crafting items. This means you can only craft cards with one crafting piece requirement because you only have one acting captain. This is very different from the serve action. Now for items. You can put them into three categories. You have 3 items that modify your battle action, 3 items that interact with acclaim, and then the boots. So I guess more like 2 categories and then the boot. The boot allows you to move your captain twice, ignoring rule. This can be useful, but it can be more efficient to utilize crossbows and bags for movement instead. Swords allow you to take all warriors that you deal hits to as hostages, which sounds good, but is in reality a little niche, since they still have to go into forests without hostages. It's better in clearings that are adjacent to more forests, but this also means you are giving your opponent an obvious clearing to choose to get back the most warriors. To fully utilize the sword, therefore, it should be on the first turn of your captain cycle, so you have the time to really score off of all the prisoners. One thing I would want to note is that the current reading of the law states that the ability have at the ability applies to faction warriors, so you cannot take a hireling as prisoner. However, assault does not specify faction warrior, which would imply that hirelings can be taken prisoner if you are using a sword. I am not sure if this is intentional or not, but that's how I would currently interpret the rules. Overall, I think the crossbow and bag are more useful more of the time. Now we're going to go over some items that allow you to move and battle in the same turn, as these are, I think, some of the strongest items that the Knaves have access to. And so these are going to be the crossbow and the bag. The crossbow can be a great opening move, since you haven't yet had the opportunity to recruit any skunks. It can be quite risky to take on battles on turn 1 with only 2 warriors. Since your captain starts in a forest, not only are you able to move and battle for 1 action, but you get to take 1 less hit for it too. It's also a great recovery item to use after you have lost a captain and are trying to get back into the game. You can also use it after using a boot in a pretty unique way. If you are clearing away from where you want to battle in, instead of dashing to move twice, you can dash into the next clearing and then into the forest, and then skirmish out to take advantage of taking 1 less hit. You can also do this to move many more clearings at once, since a forest is connected to several different clearings. The bag has 2 parts to it. The first is that if your captain is hit in battle, you can move them into an adjacent forest instead of losing them, which is great when you are worried about ambushes, which, as you will learn, is the Knaves' nightmare, as most of the time you will only be attacking with a few warriors protecting your precious captain. It's even better if you don't lose your captain, however, since you get to move after the battle for free. This means you can nab, take a prisoner, and place an acclaim, move into an adjacent clearing, and battle to take another prisoner and place another acclaim, all for only 2 actions. The bag is possibly one of my favorite items to search for when playing the Knaves, and as it is always useful, which is honestly only fitting, since for the other faction in the game that uses items, it's often their least favorite to see. Now let's talk about tea. I find that usually when you're using tea or coins, you're using it in a clearing that you already have an acclaim in, since you're going to be battling for prisoners anyways, and the claim sort of comes with it. This is a good way to recruit warriors, and I think especially on turn 1, if you're not able to skirmish, you may need to use this to make sure you have enough bodies between your enemies and your captain. Once you start recruiting, though, you will reach your threshold very quickly, since you only have 10 skunk warriors, leading to tea being a little less useful by the mid to late game. Coins are great because cards are flexible. Cards mean more items, and if not, worst case scenario, more recruits. If tea is giving you 2 recruits, at worst, coins is doing the same thing. Of course, with more restrictions. This is why I often see myself using tea more within the first couple turns and coins after that, as coins is sort of a more flexible version of tea that is not as immediate in its rewards. Finally, let's talk about the hammer. If a claim is already in your captain's clearing, the hammer allows you to use that acclaim, and all matching acclaim, to craft any number of cards that you can. So if you're activating a hammer in a fox clearing with a claim, and you have a claim in 2 other fox clearings, then you can craft a crossbow and a sword with 1 action, scoring the 3 victory points from the cards, unlike if you were to filch them. Of course, you couldn't actually filch a sword because you can never use more than 1 crafting piece to filch. Each acclaim can only be activated once per turn, as is pretty standard with crafting pieces in general. Okay, so that's all of the mechanics you need to know about when playing as or against the Knaves. I'll briefly go over some strategy, but like in the Twilight Council video, take this with a grain of salt as they are a print-and-play faction that I have limited experience playing. That experience is exactly 2 games as the Knaves and 2 against them. Okay, so the first thing I want to cover is ambushes. Ambushes are terrifying for the Knaves, since you want to be attacking early to get prisoners and acclaim, but you only start with 1 skunk warrior defending each captain. 1 ambush can cause you to completely skip your turn, while also being punished when you inevitably have to use that captain again later down the line. On your first turn especially, here are some tips for mitigating ambush losses. The first and most passive, or maybe obvious, is to simply not attack on your first turn. You can try to place 2 acclaim down in strategic locations using tea, coins, or a hammer, so that you can still score a point. Then you can dump your cards into recruiting 2 warriors, so that you can be ready to face the threat of ambushes on your turns afterwards. This is a pretty passive way of playing that you don't really need to do, but if you want to stay completely safe, then that is the best way, of course, to avoid an ambush. The other next thing I'll talk about is skirmishing. So taking 1 less hit means you will only lose 1 warrior to an ambush. However, keep in mind, if you're battling a warrior, which of course you will be, there's about a 50% chance you take at least 1 rolled hit and lose your captain. However, just the idea of skirmishing may make an opponent not use their ambush since they know they are getting less value from it. You can also just try battling low-value targets, prioritizing single warriors that your opponent might care less about losing. If you have to choose between a warrior defending a token and just a normal warrior on turn 1, even though you would get more points from killing the token, it might be worth it just to kill the single warrior, since if they have an ambush, they're probably going to use it to defend that token, whereas they might not use it, just a single warrior that's in a clearing. If the cats are in the game, battle a single cat that's in a clearing that's far away from the cat's homeland, and if it's the crows, then you can just battle a crow that's not defending a plot. If you're playing against the moles, battle those single moles that are left in clearings, only for the purpose of swaying, which is actually quite useful because you are actually kind of hurting the moles in a way, and that it'll be more difficult for them to sway. The other way is revel. So reveling before your first battle so that you have 3 warriors instead of 2. You could even move revel, move battle on the first turn to ensure you still get to place an acclaim after you revel. Of course, this still comes with the risk of there's about a 50% chance you take 1 rolled hit, in which case you would lose all of your warriors if you got ambushed. Finally, the last way is to have a counter ambush ready. If you have an ambush card in your starting hand, keep it and prioritize clearings that you have the ability to counter ambush in. I think the Knaves is one of the few factions that actually you might want to pick because you have an ambush in your starting hand. Being able to battle without worrying about ambushes is a very huge boon to playing the Knaves in their playstyle. One way that you can keep your captains alive that is going to be very useful to keep in mind, is by ending your turn in a forest. If you had a series of costly battles and are left with 1 action and no skunks protecting your captain, I would strongly consider moving into a forest so no one can punish you while you recover your skunk population. Especially if there is a skunk already in a forest due to someone removing an acclaim earlier on. Alright, so let's cover some faction matchups. So the Knaves love playing against factions that have a lot of stray warriors. They don't mind losing, especially the cats. But the moles, crows, lizards all come to mind as well as factions that will have a lot of stray warriors. You have a very interesting relationship with the Woodland Alliance, since they really don't want to be taken prisoner, since they often need to utilize every warrior in their supply that they can, but you often don't want to risk rolling badly with guerrilla warfare to actually take them. Riverfolk hate losing warriors, and will often keep all their warriors together, but if you can find stray trade posts with a single garrison, those can be a great source of both prisoners and free token points. You and the keepers both tend to be gravitated towards the same clearings, those with a lot of adjacent forests. If you have several warriors in a clearing adjacent to 5 forests, so that they can delve, consider assaulting there a couple times so that you can take a third of their warriors hostage, slowing down their game until they inevitably get all of them back in the same clearing. The rats have plenty of warriors for you to take, and with the worst card draw in the game, they will rarely have the ambush cards that you despise seeing. The bats love to protect your acclaim, which can be good for you as it is expensive for you to protect it with only 10 skunks. Just make sure they aren't scoring faster than you are with it. The lizards don't mind you killing their stray warriors since they get acolytes for it, and you don't really mind them getting acolytes as long as you can stay clear of the outcast clearings. Remember, they cannot convert your captains, only your skunks. The birds are tricky since they have battle actions they have to use, so if you end your turn in bird territory, they may attack you if they see you as a big enough a threat. Consider retreating into forests at the end of your turn if it means a better chance at keeping your captain alive. Finally, let's talk about the captains themselves. I of course haven't played with all the captains, but I do have some thoughts on all of them, some general thoughts. So I want to cover all knave captains first that give free moves, since that is a pretty obvious way of having a more efficient turn if you don't have to waste actions moving. I haven't played the Ronin yet, but it seems to me like an especially interesting captain to play that could score huge points in a single turn. If all of your captains have a sword, then you effectively are playing the rats with 3 prowess on turn 1, although you can only use it once every 3 turns, and you wield a much smaller army to utilize all these battle actions. However, if you have enough skunks with the Ronin, you could have a very powerful turn, where theoretically you could do even 4 battles, placing a claim and taking at least 4 hostages. The Scoundrel is similar to the Ronin, but you don't get any extra benefit besides being able to move in battle, whereas the Ronin still gets the extra ability from the sword to take more hostages. The Thief has a nice movement ability as well, but a bit more situational. If you're in a clearing with no acclaim, you want to battle there before you move out, but you generally want to filch before you battle, in case you destroy all the enemy pieces you are in during the battle. If you destroy all the enemy pieces, then you can't filch an item off your opponent. So in many situations, this filch movement may actually not synergize well with the Knaves playstyle. Of course, if you're filching to craft an item instead, then it could make sense to battle, then filch, craft that item, move for free, and then battle again. I'm going to group these 3 together because they all sort of do similar things. The Adventurer, Tinker, and Vagrant focus a lot on card draw and crafting. And I think that these 3 captains together in particular could lead to a very interesting strategy where instead of battling everyone for prisoners, you draw through the deck and craft everything you can find, scoring a lot of points that way. The great thing about the Knaves being able to do this is that you can justify it in a rats game since they can't steal any of the items that you're crafting. The Harrier enhances the dash ability, which to be honest is an item I don't think you want to be using too often anyways, as it's more efficient to get your moves while also battling, placing a claim or filching. However, at the same time, 3 moves for 1 action is a lot of moves. Ranger is great since Skirmish and Nab are already 2 of my favorite actions. Just a good ability to have. Arbiter is a bit niche, as with so few warriors, you rarely want to be taking more hits than you have to, and it's rare that the extra hit would actually be another prisoner you're able to take. If used in the right situation, it could be very strong, though. The Jailer is amazing. You get a crossbow and a bag, and your nab battles can now mean you take 1 less hit. I will probably always be picking this captain if I can. The downside isn't even that bad, since you can only take 1 prisoner anyways. So if you're destroying 2 or 3 warriors, it's usually best to kill less to take less hits. The one time that you would be dealing only 1 hit and still take a hit is if you roll 1-1, So I would use this anytime I fail to roll a 0 on one of my 2 dice, except 1/1, which is just 1 in 16 chance. The Gladiator is okay. It makes an okay action a little better, in my opinion. Nothing to talk too much about, I think. The cheat is actually very useful, I think. There is no limit to how many times you can cheat on your turn, unlike with some other captain abilities. So if you've accumulated a ton of boots, let's say, you can put them to good use doing whatever you want with them on your cheat turn. And that is everything I have to say about the Knaves for now. The Knaves are actually a really fun faction and has all the best parts of the Vagabond without all of the bad parts, I think. The only thing that maybe feels a bit off is that if they are completely replacing the Vagabond in your games, like I plan to do with mine, that means that out of the 12 factions, the only faction that can remove ruins are the Rats. It certainly feels a little wrong, but certainly something we can live with. Thank you all for watching, and have a good rest of your day.